Welcome, fans, friends, and, casual people that just happen to stumble across the podcast. This is episode 5 of season 14 for Mentioned in Dispatches. I have no idea what episode that actually adds up to, but I think we're right around 170 or so at this point, which is kind of cool that we've made it this far. And in keeping with the spirit of season 14, we are digging in a little deeper into some specific game series. We've already dug into the OCS series. Tonight, we're going digital, and we are digging into the Total War series of computer war games. And if we're going to talk Total War stuff, we need the high priest of Total War himself, our buddy Gus. This is probably the only time you've ever been described as the high anything, right?
I will take the fifth on that.
But yeah, our buddy Lloyd is here because he has got a long and well-documented love affair with the Total War series. And because we need somebody to represent the other side. Although, Jim, to be fair, there are things about the Total War series of games that you have enjoyed over the years, right?
Yes.
It seemed to be a qualified yes. But obviously there are some things you think it could do better, and I have a feeling you will hold court on that at length at some point this evening.
Oh, I absolutely want to be fair to the other guests and let him offer the praises of the paean that I'm sure will be offered to the Total War series before I offer my criticism.
Yeah. So, looking at the Total War series of computer games, these things have been around going on like 18, 19 years at this point. We're more than 20 years in at this point, aren't we, on the Total War series?
I think Shogun was released in 2000.
Yeah, June
okay,
2000.
So we're at 25 years.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, been around for a while. You'd think I'd have been a little more prepared for this with like the inventory of all of these things. So we had Shogun, Medieval, Rome, Medieval 2, Empire, Jim's favorite, Napoleon. We did Shogun 2, Rome 2, Attila. There's been a couple of Warhammers. There's been a Britannia one, Troy, Pharaoh, and 3 Kingdoms.
That's it. That's everything.
That's all of them. Okay.
That's all of them.
I was making the list earlier, and I thought I had managed to gather them all up. I was trolling the forums to take a look through and see if I got them all. So Gus, again, talk to us. You're the guy that's been, that's here as the primary Total War fan, right? You are the argument for the defense here on the things you love, the things you enjoyed. What was it that grabbed you about the Total War series when you first started with them, and what keeps you coming back to them?
Well, going back to the very first game, there was no deep or like revealing reason why I love that game other than the setting itself, because I always loved Japanese history. At the time, I think I was 25 years old also when the game was first released. So I was still young enough to be impressionable and look at a game and like really be in awe of what it was doing. And it was brand new too. It was also, I think, the first year or maybe the second year that I actually had a PC. Before that, I never had a PC before. I always used consoles. So it was a combination of different wow factors that really drew me in. I got to say too that in the last, 5 or 10 years, my love of Total War has sort of been on the decline. Not that hot for the Warhammer setting, although I do have the games. They just don't grab me the way they used to. And in the first couple of years, going back to Shogun and the original Medieval game, I even had spread my wings a bit and played some multiplayer with some of the really old school dudes, Brant, that we knew from way back.
Back when Wargamers still did wargames, unlike these days.
Yes. I'll leave it at that. But I think I look back at it fondly for a whole bunch of reasons beyond the game itself, nostalgia and emotion and connecting to good times and people that I once knew and have not heard from in a long time. I look back at all these things fondly, but then I could be a realist too. And like where the series is at now, it gets a ton of flack. Like the last 2 or 3 years have not been kind to Creative Assembly, and rightfully so. I mean, they're a totally different entity than they were clearly when they started 25 years ago. Their priorities are clearly really different. The world is totally different. The gaming world is totally transformed. There's so many different factors that are different than when the game was new. But I think the novelty of it for that first Shogun game is what brought me in initially. And for the first 10 years, at least, it was just one incredible game after another. Even if it had its major glaring faults, like the AI. You could always go to multiplayer for like a match and get humiliated by your best friends, like I did all the time.
That's what friends
I
are
think
for.
for me, it was the settings. They had one good setting after another, and it just really drew me in, and kept me really interested for years and years.
Yeah. I whether they've evolved into a direction you find positive or negative, nobody's going to stay the same over 25 years. So, I mean, change was going to happen. The question was what kind of thing. Our buddy Sam has made it. Sam, we were expecting you like another 5 minutes from now, but glad you were here. Glad you were joining us. I hope that dinner is not being uncooperative with you as you hop over here.
No, all is good now. Thank you.
Cool. Gus was just talking a little bit about sort of what grabbed him with the Total War series and what has kept him coming back to the Total War series for the time that it did. And so, before we dialed Jim in here to give us some of his thoughts on it, jump in here a little bit because I know you're a fan of a bunch of the Total War series of games. What was it that grabbed you, and what was it that kept you coming back to the extent that you did?
Well, I know what grabbed me initially was the sheer scale of the battles. I remember seeing the trailer for the original Shogun game, like on an old Flash site way back in 1999, 2000, and was blown away. And as I learned more about the game and found out how it included the battles were going to factor in things like terrain, morale, fatigue, weather, and how all those things interacted. For me, that was amazing. I never heard of that being done before. And then, and of course, the subsequent games, kind of expanded on that. Medieval, of course, did to a fair extent. And then, later games expanded things more on the campaign side as far as, diplomacy, building out your cities, your provinces, your territory. You're developing your generals, developing more as characters, and even to some extent the political aspects of your faction. That's what has kind of kept me coming back.
Yeah, for folks that are not necessarily big fans of the Total War series or may not be familiar with it, because again, we've got a lot of podcast listeners that are primarily board gamers, and they use their PCs to yell at other people about board games online, but they're not actually playing games on their PCs very often. The Total War series is really, it's a strategic level game, but zooms in a lot for the battles where you're much closer to a tactical level when the fighting actually starts. Is that an accurate characterization there?
More or less. The empire management is turn-based, and then when a battle occurs, assuming you don't just choose to auto-resolve it, the battles are fought out in real time, and I like that combination. Where the empire management, that's a little bit more, you can do that at your leisure. The battles are real time. They're, you got to respond to the situation as it's unfolding. That's another aspect I appreciate. So, and of course, forgot to mention this kind of obvious bit, but at least especially until more recently, I like that the games focused on various periods of history. I'm a pretty big history nerd, so that obviously appealed to me as well.
Yeah, so the Warhammer stuff less appealing to you.
Less so, yeah. I still enjoy them to some extent, but not as much as the games set in historical periods.
Yeah, totally understand. Makes sense. So, Jim, before you start telling us where some of the headaches are, you've played them enough to, at some point, you looked at that game and said, man, I want to try that. So for you, what was it that got your attention and, sort of kept you engaged there for the time that you were? And then at what point did you kind of lose interest and drift away, and why?
Well, first and foremost, I should say I've got all of them. I have never stopped buying them, if only on the Steam sale, because it's sort of like watching a slow motion train wreck while at the same time hoping it won't be. My initial purchase was based on a magazine article. Kids, look it up. There was a PC Gamer magazine, I know, with a CD in it. But in that magazine, there were photographs of a game that was coming out, and it was a niche game. This was not a major industrial release. This was not a blue chip title by any stretch of the imagination. that was going to combine a Risk-like strategic map with all the elements of a miniatures tabletop game.
Okay.
And it was going to be called Shogun. Now, unlike many of my friends and some of the folks on this podcast, I am not very big on Japanese history that way. I know of it. I've certainly, read my share and what have you, but it's never been my thing. But that having been said, I liked Ron as much as the next guy. And I said, well, I would like this. Now, I was 34 years old by that point when it came out. And I said, all right, well, let's have a look. And I did. Now, my PC, as it turned out, was inadequate to the task of playing this game. Hard to imagine given what Shogun looks like in retrospect, but there it is. And I still thought, once I finally got a PC that could work it, that it was a really neat game. It was simple. And again, I repeat, the strategic layer was basically Risk with some rules thrown in. No doubt, more complexity, but nothing approaching the Civ-esque treatment it's getting these days. And the battles were engaging, if real time, and occasionally a little difficult to manage.
Okay.
Then, so it was a good game, and I enjoyed it. It was a good deal of fun. Medieval came out, also with that same engine in 2002, and it was very good also. I enjoyed that as well. Now, that's Medieval 1. My world changed with Rome Total War. This was the one that really, really got me and split my head in two directions. It was far more lovely as an engine. It had far more choices and options. I played the mess out of it, but it was the first time that I started to say that I wanted to take that square peg and smash it into the round hole that I wanted, because I wanted to play what I felt were authentic ancient battles. You had this astonishing array of nations. And this, by the way, obviously has become a trait of all the Total War games. You have this astonishing array of factions, astonishing array of troops, gorgeous graphics for 2004, I believe, and all these other things. And yet the battles, for the first time, I said, this just is a toy. This is absolutely not the way these battles went. They're too fast. They're too clicky. These units are far too flexible. I went to the trouble, and I actually ran for some time what I called a digital DBA game, De Bellis Antiquitatis, where I tried to regularize the forces, because in addition to being too clicky, in addition to being too fast, some of the units were ridiculous. And so I tried to grab the units and turn them into something more resembling antiquity and De Bellis Antiquitatis and the things that we were all playing at the turn of that millennium. And so it was, and again, it was there that the big split occurred for me. Fabulously good looking, fabulously great sounding, creating this amazing gestalt. Oh, the terrain was incredible, this incredible gestalt appearance. And yet at its heart, it was just such a ridiculous, clicky, nonsensical toy. And that made me mad in the way you get mad at a child that you know should be doing so much better and isn't. The kid that you know should be a straight A student, but just can't put the damn bong down. And that's still, to this day, the way I feel about the Total War series.
Jim, I've always liked and respected you, but that's just gone up by an order of magnitude.
I guess part of that is kind of the comparison of expectations versus delivery, right? I mean, were they trying to sell you a toy, or were they trying to sell you something that they purported was some sort of deep and well-researched and historically accurate kind of thing? Whether you want to call it a game or a sim, we'll leave that argument for another time. But if they're saying, if I'm theoretically the OSG games in the line of Napoleonic battles and Stratego take place in the same era of warfare, right? One of those is purporting to be a reasonably historically accurate model of how warfare worked at the time. The other one is not. Were the Total War games, while being sort of thematically appropriate, were they actually trying to claim, hey, here is a historically accurate way to try and refight these battles, or just, hey, here's a fun video game with this kind of flavor slapped on it. And I don't recall one way or the other sort of how those things were marketed. I wasn't paying much attention to them because, you know, the computer game space is not my key area. But Jim, I think some of that, like if I were told, hey, here's a historically accurate something that quite frankly is not, then I would be fully expecting to have the same kind of reaction you did, which is this is a toy with some pretty paint on it rather than this is the thing I was promised. So, I mean, was it an issue of expectations versus delivery? Where do you think?
I don't think so. I think they pretended to be this for the longest time. They went out and they marketed themselves as, again, the map for all of them, all the way through the fantasy stuff, the armies, the troop types. They tried. They made a level attempt at putting on a show of representing warfare in the medieval period, in the Roman period. And by the way, I'm in no point here talking about the strategic layer, which is a separate conversation. But they never, ever have gotten over the fact that their engine doesn't care about the way battles were fought in those periods. And I don't know as you would market that. How do you put on the box? Inside, you will find a profoundly inauthentic representation of battle in the Napoleonic period. I don't know as that sells. They want to make you believe that that's what that is. And again, it's well, you know, we only got an hour, so I suppose I might as well hit my mark right here. Of course, my greatest animus is Total War Napoleon. It is spectacular looking. It is spectacular sounding. It has great images of troops crawling over battlefields, and it is an unfettered, unshirted nonsense. And I have, let me see, I'll look in Steam. I've got 62 hours in the thing. I've got more in Empire, parenthetically. But I just couldn't get there because it's all so damned stupid. Yeah. And the list here is long. We can certainly go into it if you care to. I am willing to print receipts. But they would never market their stupidity because that, again, wouldn't sell much. They want to convince people. They want to show up in all the lists of top 10 historical war games for 2022. They want to be on those lists, and they don't deserve to be there.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I've always called Rome Total War the dumb blonde of the series.
The original or Rome 2?
What's that?
The original or Rome 2? Or
the
both?
original.
Okay.
Yeah. The original Rome Total War, that was such a jarring shock for me. And for similar reasons as Jim has already outlined. It looked fantastic. Sounded fantastic. I love the soundtrack.
Okay.
But the fast units, the brain dead AI, the types of units that were on there. Even I, who am not an expert on that period at all, knew that a lot of the units in there were ridiculous.
Yeah. So a quick question with regard. So we've mentioned the AI a couple of times. Advancements in computer game capabilities and technologies and you know some of the underlying engines have reduced some of the older games with which we look back so fondly to, quite frankly, some crap. They were great in their day, but have not necessarily stood the test of time. Looking back, is the AI just bad because that was the best they could do at the time, or was it bad for the time in which it was created? You know, Sam, you were the one talking about AI there. Was it brain dead in its day, or is it just simply looking bad because we've gotten better at AI these days?
Well, at least with Rome and to some extent Empire, it was bad for its day. I mean, with the original Shogun and Medieval, I could when fighting an army of similar or greater size, there was a genuine chance I could lose. Now, granted, I'm not a strategic or tactical mastermind, so that's not necessarily saying much. But the fact was that in Rome and Empire, I could regularly take on battles 2, even 3 times my size and beat them pretty regularly. It was, and I never felt like I was never in much danger of losing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Our 14th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters, but especially our regimental patrons who supported us at the top level.
McKenna.
What?
We don't need to sing it.
Yes, we do.
We can just do it normal.
No. Our 14th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters, but especially our regimental patrons who supported us at the top level. Regiment of Strategy Gaming would like to thank Stagger Wing, Paul LaFontaine, Matthew Rowe, Joseph Knoll, Fred and our favourite podcast dog, Kevin Bertram, Catastrophe Games, Patrick Garrity, Michael Sunborg, Chet Bell and Andy J. Wargaming is our jam, and they help us spread it. You too can join the Armchair Dragoons as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
Gus, looking back on some of those games, what was your experience with the AI over time, and see it get good or bad or better or worse?
I think, ironically, I remember the AI in the original game and then in Medieval being pretty good. And I, about a month ago, I played a campaign of the original Medieval, and the AI still holds up. And so comparing that to one of the Warhammer games, the AI in the newer games just seems frenetic and sort of insane, not really programmed or not really focused in any way. So I'm not sure what is going on with their AI development. And that's always been, since the very first game, one of the top 3 complaints of everyone who plays the games is the AI is crap. But then you have some of the installments that really takes AI to the limit, like in the second Shogun game, Shogun 2, which I think is probably the best of the entire series. The AI in that game is proficient, to say the least. I don't know what happened, and it doesn't make any sense for the AI to get worse over time, but it has.
Yeah.
I think part of that is the task that they put before it. If you look at the board game that was Shogun 1, it was a straightforward board game, which much easier to program for, it would seem to me, to design for. When you look at the range of factors that you're asking a computer to consider by the time you get to Warhammer 3, it doesn't surprise me at all that an AI is struggling.
We've got this dichotomy between the strategic layer and the tactical layer. We've talked some about the tactical layer in terms of, hey, it looks good, but the way some of those things behave in the battles aren't necessarily as accurate as they could be. Before we jump back to the strategic layer, just looking at, a last thought on some of those zoomed in tactical battles. Gus, you had talked about kind of your love for that medieval period of Japan. Obviously, the graphics are going to be part of what draws you in. That's one of the key selling points of playing on the computer. In terms of what you saw portrayed on the battle, how well or how poorly did it compare to other things you had read or studied, or even some games that you may have also played in that era? Going all the way back to Shogun, but if there's another one of the series that jumps out as particularly noteworthy, chime in with that one as well. In terms of the tactical battles, was the behavior sort of what you expected, not what you expected? Do you have some specific examples of things that really stuck out as, man, that was damn cool, or whoa, that kind of put me off a little?
I think a lot of it was beyond expectation, because I didn't have expectation. I was a clean slate. I didn't know what to expect, but I really, at 25, I was not thinking about the AI. What I was really caught by was, and this is going to sound odd for a computer game, was the music. I think the composer's name, Jeremy Soule. I'm not sure. Sam, you may remember his name.
Are you talking
about the couple of games?
Jeff Van Dyke.
Jeff Van Dyke. Jeremy Soule did the Skyrim soundtrack. That's my bad. But the music was so good, and it was so atmospheric. And I think maybe because the graphics were not perfect, you sort of, or at least I did, use my imagination a little bit, and harken back to books I'd read or movies I had seen, like Jim mentioned before, Kurosawa movies, which I was always a fan of. And then this thing came along, Shogun, where you were finally able to sort of insert yourself into a Kurosawa movie. The AI may have sucked, but you were in there and you could make of it whatever you wanted to. And I don't think that had ever been done before, especially for the first 2 games.
Yeah. Sam, similar thing with you before we go back over to Jim for some tactical analysis, then we'll zoom out to the strategic level. Was there a particular one of the earlier games or which one kind of grabbed you as, wow, that's a kind of a neat thing to see down at that tactical level?
You could name either one of the first 2 games, either the either Shogun 1 or Medieval 1, honestly. And Gus honestly said a lot of the same a lot of the same things that I would, which is, even though those first two games, the units are essentially represented as sprites, still zooming in and watching the troops clash with each other, your imagination does a lot of it. And the visuals didn't have to be amazing looking. Just watching these massive armies going into combat, and the AI in those first two games actually was pretty decent, especially in the tactical level. Not brilliant, but as Gus said, proficient. And it actually would flank you. It might pull a feigned withdrawal. That was really cool. Like, it was actually great. It was actually great when I lost. I mean, like, wow, that was amazing. So just seeing those sorts of things, and anyway, either of those first two games were what really did it for me.
So, Jim, you had mentioned in particular, obviously, your knowledge of the Napoleonic games, but also thinking some about, having played Empire, and as you mentioned, having played more Empire than not. Can you give us a specific example of this type of unit didn't behave the appropriate way, or these guys didn't fight the way they historically should have been fighting in the midst of one of those battles? Is there a particular example that you just kind of threw your hands up and went, all right, I'm done, I'm out?
This became acute during Napoleon, just because I care so much about the period and the representation of the era, but it's true of everything throughout. What is a unit? What am I supposed to be looking at? How big is it supposed to be? Is it 1-to-1? Is it a scale representation? It doesn't ever tell me that I can recall. I have the faint notion that in Napoleonics, it's supposed to be something in the vicinity of a brigade, because if you tell me it's a battalion, I'm going to be really mad, given how much ground it that it is able to cover on most maps. But okay, so what is it? And each one of these eras, for all the research that they did, had terms to describe what a body of men was. Is it a cohort if it be a Roman legion? Is it a maniple? What is it? And I mean, just be general with me. Give me something. Give me some sense of ratio. So there's that. But then there's the biggest thing really of all. They're just far too manipulable. I remember once I was watching my son do cross country. And if you know anything about high school cross country, you know that they stand the young men and women into kind of bins, into cattle chutes. And, there were probably 150 young men running against him. And they came out in groups of 25, and they lined up 10 across, 5 deep, and then in multiple groups going back. And as they left the chute kind of running forward, I said, my God, that must be what it was like to watch a group of men run forward in one of these medieval units. And I said, okay, now get them to stop. And now get them to wheel to their right or to their left, or to sidestep to the right or to their left, or to really obey any command related to their depth, their width, their deployment. It's all far too easy. And I knew that. I knew that all the way through. But when you get to the Napoleonic period and you look at the speed with which a unit can form square, can form line, it's nonsense. And again, if that's what you want to play, you should play it. But someone like me is going to say, okay, you're doing something that's silly, that just it didn't work that way, it doesn't work that way. And to borrow the line earlier, you are kind of the dumb blonde here, and I'm sure it's a dumb male blonde. I want to be crystal clear so no one takes offense.
Zooming out from that tactical level and zooming out to the strategic level, Sam, you had mentioned sort of developing your leaders, and you have some diplomatic actions that are available to you. You have some limited economic engines. This is not a full-on 4X game. This is not a full-on empire management game, but there is some economy within the game. There's a variety of sort of empire building that goes on, but again, not to the full panoply of options you've got in some other true empire management kinds of games. However, it's more than you would expect from, just your standard sort of pokey stabby kind of game. Gus, as you look at the strategic layer of the Total War series. What at that level did you like? What did you not like? Do you have a specific example of something that, as you were managing that within your game, you sort of said, hey, I really like how that works, or, oh my God, they really needed to fix this?
Well, throughout the game series, there were always elements like light city building, which was always fun. I think in the first Rome game, you were able to walk through the city you had built, and then
I still miss that feature.
Yeah, I don't know why they ever took it away, because it was awesome. And then also along in that strategic layer were different board units. You had diplomats in some games, you had merchants in some games, you had spies, you had assassins, and then there was one game that even had witches. I think it was in medieval too. And some of those units were pretty unique, and the way they functioned were fun. And I could play that component of the game for hours and hours and hours at a time, just because the different factions represented and the different parts of the world that were represented were just fascinating to me. And it's been an age-old argument back and forth since this series was created on realism versus fun. And I remember an argument for the first medieval game. I might have read it on the Wargamer, where each faction's units and groups of units on the tactical part of the game looked like a European football team. And people would just laugh and laugh and laugh their ass off because of how unrealistic they were, how unrealistic they moved, how unrealistic the functioning was. But then you'd have people on the other side who'd say, well, if it was much more to the other end, to the other pole, and it was much more realistic, how fun would it be? Where's the line between the fun and the realism?
Yeah. Sam, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, to harken back to something that Jim mentioned, the empire building aspects have expanded a lot over the years, to the point that now, he mentioned that they've become a lot more, forget how he said it, but that they've become a lot more Civ-like. Almost feels like they're copying the Civ games in some ways, and there's definitely some truth to that. There's a lot more to do on the empire management side now, as far as like building your cities, developing your lands, diplomatic actions, internal politics, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you like about the games. I still have mixed feelings about it. One thing I will say, whatever you might say about the Warhammer games, the empire building aspects are simplified. It's more about the city building aspects are simplified. There is developing your characters, like building up their, as they level up, you get to choose their skills, which admittedly is something that you didn't get in the first few games. You didn't get to choose that. You were just handed, the game just handed, hey, you get this skill, you get this skill, and it was kind of random. Ultimately, I do enjoy those. Whatever they've done with those games, for the most part, I like what they've done there. Sometimes I think it's a bit extra, but admittedly, I think they've done all right for the most part.
Jim, strategic level, the strat layer of Total War. Obviously, there's, no end of the criticisms that you're going to make of those real-time battles and that tactical layer. But once you zoom out to the strategic layer, does it get any better from your point of view? And if not, what are the criticisms you've got at that level? If it does, what are the things it's doing well?
I think one of the most interesting things that has happened as Shogun has hit, and I was trying to figure out which one of their games has been the best selling, because they've certainly invested a lot in Warhammer, and I think Warhammer is their best seller.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's you do you, man. But if you take a look at their sales, and I was looking at I was trying to figure out what would be a believable sales chart, but looking at
that's adorable. A believable sales chart about a computer game.
Right, exactly. Most of their games have sold in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It would seem that Warhammer has sold in the millions.
Yes.
And one of the things that I said when I first played Warhammer, the first version, my son loves Warhammer 3. He plays it a great deal, as much for the IP and the other things like that. I mean, I give them all the credit in the world. Well, let me stick to my point. What they did with Warhammer is free themselves from all the history stuff that bothers me. This is a bunch of orcs. This is 25 halberdiers. This is 30, when suddenly you're talking about vampire counts and tomb kings and, why am I Kislev? You suddenly got the bear people in Kislev. You've sort of got to take a breath out and go, let's not worry quite so much about exactly what this unit is, how it should behave, how it should be depicted, how it should fight. Let it go. It's okay. And when it was freed from that, it started to feel a little more reasonable. And then when you go to the strategic layer in Warhammer, it is so steeped in the lore. It is, it's almost a primer if you're inclined to learn what the rules of the Warhammer Old World are, that it's a remarkable experience. As to Napoleon, well, there you get into the same problem that we have with all strategic level games. Gamers, to quote Dr. Starrett, which I will always do, don't really want a good AI. They want a decent AI that will shadow box with them just long enough to give them a challenge and then let them become the ruler of the known world. And, I conquered the world twice as Napoleon. I conquered the world 3 or 4 times in Empire. And each time it's an absolutely ahistorical result. But I think it's what we want, it seems, as a market when we're playing these sorts of games. I doubt with the, even people who play Europa Universalis, they bristle. The only game that's gotten close is Crusader Kings, where people are willing to accept smaller achievements. But usually we want a shot at conquering the world, which is a historical nonsense. So are they enjoyable in their way? I'd say so. Do they succeed as board games, which ultimately is what they are?
Yeah. I would think that one of the issues at the strategic level that you would run into would still be a facet of you're still looking for some of the big personalities that had strategic effects, right? We've often joked, quite a bit about any number of Napoleonic personalities and whether or not Jim would be drinking buddies with any of them. And there's probably more than a few that you'd be more than happy to go out for a pint with, and there's probably a couple you'd rather leave in the alley behind the bar. But when you're looking at the historical game, inserting a particular historical character probably isn't that difficult. Inserting a historical character that behaves in some way close to what they did historically, probably a lot harder, right? How do you script Bernadotte to perform as Bernadotte did in the Napoleonic Wars, is probably a lot more challenging than just making up some orc leader for Warhammer, right? Even if there is some lore behind who some of those Warhammer leaders might be, I'm guessing that reflecting those big personalities in the game is tougher. Is that a fair statement there?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it is always the case that, well, and it's what we talk about in gaming all the time. Just how far do you want to straitjacket somebody?
Yeah.
To the point that they suddenly don't have a fun time. And it's a problem that Warhammer has probably more than any other IP I can think of with its level of popularity. Warhammer sets up all the time. This sword is unstoppable. It always hits. But except when it hits this armor.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Did you just tell me that the irresistible force has struck the immovable object? and so, yeah, they've got that balance. But look, I'll tell you what the real baseline thing is. When you're on your strategic level and you're about to zap down to that battle, that process, that visit to the battlefield can't take 4 hours. If you're going to be playing this game, this strategic level of this game, the battles have to be resolvable in a reasonable period of time. One of the real hassles with Warhammer 3, as I've seen it over my son. My son's got a good computer, got the same one I got. And those battles take forever to load. That's a technological issue. But, when you're down there, he will auto-resolve things far more than I think would otherwise be the case, because frankly, you don't want to get yourself tied up in it. People like me who think nothing of playing a Napoleonic battle for weeks on end, different issue. But from a mass market perspective, those battles got to click. Those battles got to keep coming.
Yeah.
And, so it's that dynamic, I think, more than anything, drives the interplay between the strategic layer and the tactical. It's all got to hang together, and it's all got to move.
Yeah, totally get it. Listen, as we are on the clock recording here, we're going to lose Gus here in just a minute. So I do want to give him a chance to get in a parting shot before he's got to take off. And then Sam and Jim and I will continue the conversation here a bit for a few more minutes. But Gus, as you look back over the pantheon of Total War games, if you've got somebody out there that may not have taken a dive into the Total War games or has only dabbled with them a little bit, what's your sales pitch for, hey, come back and try this particular title, even if it's an older title, or hey, come back and take a look at some cool new thing that they are rolling out in there? What is it that keeps you coming back, and why should other people sort of follow in your footsteps in playing the Total War games?
Well, the quick, easy answer for me is Shogun 2 Fall of Samurai, which takes place in the 1860s and 1870s. There are very few other games that even approach the subject matter, which is basically the storyline from The Last Samurai, to be like put as simplistically as I can. The factions are by nature very similar, but the strategic layer of it is just beautiful, and it's so well done, and it's exciting every single time for someone who's into the history. So if you've never played one of these games and have even a light passing interest in Japanese history, relatively modern Japanese history, Shogun 2 Fall of Samurai is where it's at. You just can't beat it. And then for something overarching, which we haven't really touched on yet, for almost all the games, going back almost the entire history of the series, is the modding of each game. Some of the games are moddable into almost infinity, like Medieval 2, where I think Medieval 2 has more mods than almost any other game in any other series. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of them. Just that, if you and these days, if you dropped like $5 for Medieval 2, that would be a lot. You'd get your $5 investment back by 100 or even 1,000 times with the amount of mods that you could enter into that game, some of which could potentially even improve the AI. I remember mods like Broken Crescent, which took the entire game of Medieval 2 and removed it from Christian Europe and put it into Muslim Asia, and gave you, instead of 20 different factions, most of which were Catholic to choose from, you had 20 different Muslim factions to choose from, ranging from like the 12th to the 13th to the 14th centuries. And that's just one game. There's mods, dozens, if not hundreds of mods for probably all the games going all the way back to the original Rome. So if you have even a passing interest in history, in whatever era and whatever nation, faction, going back 1,000, 2,000 years, you'll find something throughout the 25-year history of Total War to at least keep you entertained for dozens of hours.
All right, very cool. And ultimately, I mean, we are looking for some entertainment value out of all this. So it sounds like that might be something that you've gotten out of all those years and all those hours of playing.
Yeah, most definitely.
Cool. Gus, thank you for being here. I know you've got to punch out a little bit earlier. We're probably not going to go too much longer, but we do want to respect your time, and we appreciate you joining us for this evening.
Yeah, man. Loved it. Appreciate it.
So we will wave goodbye, and we'll continue chatting and, talk about you behind your back.
All right. Later, guys. Have a good night.
Good hanging out with you, Gus.
You too.
Take care.
Too.
All right, so as we flip back over to that, looking back at some of that strategic layer, and Jim had made the comment about sort of, Dr. Sterrett's, they want an AI to shadowbox with and then take the dive when you're ready to sort of roll over things. I think that probably has something to do with why a lot of 4X games, the late stage of the game is just really kind of running out the clock, because at that point you're usually so far ahead that you sort of know who's winning, and there's not a lot of suspense left in the game. Looking at with those comments kind of as an underlying theme, Sam, take your swing at sort of the strat level, big AI, large picture stuff that we hadn't already talked about up to this point, before we sort of take a look at some potential improvements out there.
Well, I would just add that in addition to AI shadowboxing with the player, that the player feels like their victory is an accomplishment, I think increasingly, and this has probably always been the case to justice to at least some extent. They want an AI that feels believable, that feels human-like, which of course is not truly possible, but depending on the game can be at least partially achievable. I think some games have done that better than others. Most don't do terribly well at it.
Hey, look, man, I've met a couple of people in real life that are dumber than the computer AI. I mean, they are out there.
Same.
Yeah. I've definitely run across some of those. They do exist. But
I think it's just the players want to see AI that at least doesn't do something that's just blindingly obviously stupid. That's not doing that.
Yeah. Look, there's days when I would like to see me not do something blindingly obviously stupid in the midst of playing a game. So,
Well, I mean, the standard accusation against Total War is the baby stacks, right? Where you're marching along and you're seeing, and suddenly you're watching the AI march a banner with 2 units in it, and you've got to go deal with it because yes, it will sack a early settlement. It will give you grief. It will cause spoilage. Depends on the system of the game, but they don't build it with any rationality. And at the same time, you go and wind up trying to besiege one of the settlements, and there's nobody in it, which is why I suspect, I don't know this, they eventually decided they had to start putting garrisons into things.
Yeah.
So, and this I simply don't know, although I have assumed it at the highest level of difficulty. I have assumed, having watched it at some length in Empire and Napoleon, the AI just cheats.
Not just at the higher levels either.
Okay, well, there you have it. And
the Warhammer games are notorious. Even on normal, the AI pulls extra armies out of its hat.
Yeah, so it's well known. Whenever I'm on with BB Mike, we have this conversation. I don't these days. I don't much play computer games for the AI anyway. I was very, very excited when these games started to contemplate multiplayer many years ago. I was involved in the beta test for Total War 2 down that line when they tried to build that up and never quite got it to work. I'm told my son and I have played a fair amount of Warhammer multiplayer, which is good fun. But it's still it. And can we talk about this too? My God, they're bloaty. These are big games. I mean, I'm talking, it's a little hard to believe. And I suppose they'd have to be to encompass as much as they do, which maybe isn't the insult I think it is, but I was just going to check this too. The install size for Warhammer 3, it's 120 gig. So, certainly not the biggest game by any stretch of the imagination, but it's on the upper end. And I'm not certain they're the most well-coded games there are out there. They don't feel efficient that way. They feel slovenly in the way that they're coded. They feel slow. And then when you see a cheating AI in the bargain, I don't know.
Not so much your thing, huh?
Yeah.
No, the game. Sorry, go ahead.
But no, it's only that what Gus said before departing. Look, folks. Here's the rub, and it gets thrown right in my face. Wait for a Steam sale, and I promise you, Medieval 2 will be $5. Will you get $5 worth of play out of Medieval 2? Oh my God, yes. Mm-hmm. So I got to be careful. And the same is true of all of them that aren't Warhammer. You will get value for that limited amount of dollars. So there's really no reason not to try and see whether you think I'm full of nonsense or not. But I still feel that way trying to look objectively.
At least you're trying, right? At least you didn't
I'm giving it a shot.
Your hands up and run away,
Yeah. Well, I am that way with Napoleon. Let me be clear. The fact that Napoleon Total War is not installed on my computer should tell you something.
So I was mildly surprised you even owned it. Not completely, but mildly.
Yeah, I tried. Oh God. See, I did a lot of testing for we were talking about mods earlier. I did a lot of testing for the Napoleon Total War mod for Rome, which I thought maybe they're gonna do it, and it's done by the guy who went on to do he did Darth mod.
Oh, okay.
And he's gone on to do a number of, I would say, B-level releases, some of which have become very, very successful. The greatest, to me, and this is, he did the Ultimate General series, Ultimate General Gettysburg, and
I was just going to say, I thought, he was part of that team.
That's that. Oh, I think he is that team, to tell you the truth. The guy who did that that Napoleon Total War mod, who peaked at which is the true spiritual successor to Sid Meier's Gettysburg. Ultimate General Gettysburg. Get it, kids, play it. It's really the only good one, I think, in the work that he's done, but it's really, really good. But anyway, he did that Napoleon Total War mod. I hoped it would be good. I did a lot of back and forth multiplayer testing of it. We had a lot of fun, but it was still Total War. And you just, to borrow my earlier analogy, you can't take that square peg, stick it in a round hole, hit it as hard as you can, and hope it's going to work.
Just need a bigger hammer.
Right. Bring the bigger hammer. Bring it over here. I'm going to smack that thing.
That's the solution. You need a bigger hammer.
Copy.
Yeah. I am curious, not that I've ever gone looking, but this would be the kind of thing that either of you would absolutely be amused by. When the Warhammer, the Total War Warhammer games were released, was there a great wailing and gnashing of teeth by the Warhammer fanboys for places where Total War didn't get something just right to the same level that Jim might be upset about the Napoleonic stuff not being just right? I can't imagine the Warhammer fan base being one of those, laid back, take it easy, it's just kind of cool, we got a game sort of fan base that they would absolutely be up in arms about, oh my God, these guys have square buttons instead of round ones.
I think you would have to go into the chat groups, into the Reddits and the sub forums and all that, and put a stopwatch. It didn't manifest the way you're describing, but what did happen, and it happened very quickly, was, oh, this is OP. Oh, this is not fair. Because automatically, because it was Warhammer, people wanted to play it multiplayer. And therefore, every unit that was perceived to be OP or to be too weak or wasn't as awesome as he thought it should be or she thought it should be was immediately criticized. And if you follow the patch history of Warhammer through its 3 iterations in the Total War series, you will see a constant attempt to balance multiplayer, which, as you well know, Brant, really, really amuses my tournament hating heart.
We're gonna lose Sam to an asthma attack there.
Jesus, don't go anywhere, man.
So as we wrap this up, I did want to throw something out there, and Jim, I am going to have you be cognizant of the fact that this is the wrap up comment. So careful this doesn't spiral into a separate episode. But if you were going to identify one specific thing somewhere in the Total War series, in a specific game or across the series as a whole, if there was one specific realistically achievable thing that you wanted to see the devs work on or fix or make a point of emphasis out of for whatever the next release might be or your preferred dream release. I'm gonna throw this to Jim first so Sam has a second to think about it. Jim, what's something that you would like to see them make a dedicated effort to try and address a specific way, knuckle down a little bit and give them something in the suggestion box there?
And I don't want to whiff the question, but I want to be fair and say I'm not certain that I can give them that, because what I'm asking to do is maybe have them not be who they are.
Okay.
It would be to say, if you've ever played the Scourge of War series, to have the ability to, instead of click and drag formations, have units form formations on buttons, and then make a real attempt. Yeah, you know what? That would be it. Scale the maps, decide in the Napoleonic period, decide what the troops are. What is this unit? Decide on a ground scale, decide on a troop scale, and try actually to build battles, even if they're a side branch of battles. Maybe they're not the main thing, but try to build a side branch of battles that is more reflective of the reality of the Napoleonic era.
Okay. I'm figuring that that's a combination of some guys to actually write the code, but someone with historical knowledge of the period to sort of provide the underlying appropriate kinds of behavior you would expect in those battles.
Yes, that's certainly a game design issue.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Good thoughts. CA, if you're listening, there's something that might bring Jim back to the fold and, get him to love you a little bit more. I said a little bit.
There you go.
I wasn't overcommitting hitting you. So, all right, Sam, what do you think, man? Give us a particular something to kind of narrow down in that you think would be a specific or key enhancement to either a specific game, or if there's something that's a little more series wide. Go ahead.
Make the battles less arcade game like, which is what they've become to be.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Brent. Go ahead.
I was going to say, at some point, you're probably alienating some of the existing fan base.
Yeah, probably. But the slow down the unit speeds for one thing, for starters.
Yeah.
And if it's presuming it's a historical game and not another fantasy game, because if it's a fantasy game, this probably wouldn't apply. If it's a historical game, get rid of generals' special abilities where you press rally, or where suddenly every unit within a certain radius of the general suddenly gets increased morale or rallies or stops fleeing the battlefield and turns back around to fight. Sure. I hate those quote unquote magic abilities that generals get in battles now. It drives me nuts. I don't like that units, when they're highlighted by default, they get those friggin' green outlines or whatever. Like, get rid of those, please. Like, I just need, just the fact that the unit flag above, or the flag above the unit, is bouncing up and down. That's all I need. Oh, there's so much about it. Just that sort of thing.
See, he sounds more exasperated than I am. What the heck?
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you've got that many things that need fixing, why are you sitting here telling us how much you love everything?
And I will rise in his defense. And I think that there's a truth here, which is, we look at it and we say, you're spending so much money, you're putting in so much effort. Why to borrow the line from Team America, why are you so stupid? And why can't you be intelligent like me? And it's selfish. It's what I want. And clearly, given that I bought it and millions of other people bought it, clearly I'm wrong at some level. But we look at this and we want it to be smarter.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Jim said earlier. It's you know that they can be better because they were better before.
There you go.
But it's like they've sunk to this level, and it's so disappointing.
So are they just chasing dollars? I mean, is that ultimately what they're after? They're chasing arcade player dollars?
Probably.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look, we're all trying to make money. Let's not be unfair. Okay. But I also think they're chasing the shiny. Yeah. Look, we now make 1,000 troops animated. Oh, now they each have individual animations. Oh, now they do, they do this and they do that and they do whatever. And we look at it and we're impressed and we say, oh, that is so cool. But then we look at the underlying gameplay and what do we see?
Yeah. And the irony is, most players don't even zoom into the battles that much.
No.
To see those cool animations, to see the awesome visuals and the dragon breathing fire on the enemy orcs or what have you, or if it's a historical game, the arrows going into the enemy troops. You're usually viewing the battle from a high level view.
Right. Is that just because their computers will choke on the animation?
What's that, Brant?
Is that just because their computers are going to choke on the animation?
No, it's because you can't play the battles from down there.
Yeah, you're too busy managing the battle.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
All right, fair enough.
So so why is Creative Assembly spending all this time, money, and resources on a feature that honestly most people are only going to see in the trailers, and maybe every once in a while in an easier battle where they can zoom in and look at the cool stuff?
I always watched them when they were marching to battle. Once the battle started, forget it.
Exactly.
Let's go. I wonder if some of that isn't, it's the cool animation that gets people to plunk down their shekels for the game. If they put the cool animation in the marketing part of it, but not in the game itself, then you're going to have somebody go, oh man, they fooled us. It was a bait and switch. If you put the animation in the game, somebody's got to actually code the animation, and there's actual work involved there. But does it become the dominant feature of the game? Sounds like lately it might have been more of that than not. But again, goes back to sort of chasing the shiny. This might be, borrowing the famous quote from Jurassic Park. They were so busy, figuring out how to do it that they never stop to think about whether or not they should. So maybe there's a little bit of that going on also, right? We're doing it because we can, not because we need to, or not because we should. So that could be part of it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your thoughts and comments and digging in a little bit here on the Total War series as a whole. I know we've managed to give every single one of the individual games a short shrift in our attempt to talk about the series as a whole, but we did want to narrow in a little bit and let's talk about a particular series of games. We're going to do a few more of these as the season rolls on, but we did want to dig into this a little bit. We've got threads open in our forums on a variety of different Total War games. There's a big long one on Rome and Rome 2, Attila, the Britannia one. There's some on the Warhammer stuff, but again, look, man, we're mainly war gamers and historical gamers, and so we're a little more focused on the historical, side of things than we are necessarily something like the Warhammer ones. I know there was some chatter going on Pharaoh for a while also. I think, if I'm not mistaken, of the game-specific threads, the Rome Total War thread might be our single biggest thread on the site as a whole. If not, it's got to be close. Obviously, the picks for a laugh stupid meme thread is probably the longest one we've got on the site, but I think the Rome Total War thread might be the longest game-specific thread we've got going. So if you want to jump into the conversation, you can either do so at the bottom of this podcast page, or hop over onto the site and, pop into some chatter there, or just, if you start some chattering about it on the socials, just please be sure to tag us so we can see it and join in. One last thing I will throw out to the audience as a whole. If you do get a chance, pop over to your favorite podcast platform, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or whatever, throw us a rating, give folks a review of what we're doing. Those reviews, when enough of them show up, is when the algorithm engines kick in and start recommending us to other people who are listening to similar shows, whether it's Grant with his Pushing Cardboard show, or the History on the Table guys, or Liz's Beyond Solitaire podcast, or any of the others that are similar to what we do. We start showing up in those recommendation engines based on engagement with the podcast. So take a second and throw a rating our way when you get a chance. We'd really appreciate that. All right, Jim, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Glad you were able to make it. Sam, I hope dinner doesn't cause you any indigestion, and I thank Amy for letting you off the chain for a few minutes to join us here. So I appreciate you being here. And audience, as always, we definitely appreciate you being here and joining us. So we will catch you next time on another episode of Mention in Dispatch.